Welcome to the Citizens Reporter. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. The Citizens Reporter is brought to you weekly from the Valley Access Studios in Stillwater. Now this week, to help me with this week's report is Mr. Mark Bradley, a regular Citizen Reporter. Thank you, Mr. Bradley, for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I guess I'll start out with news that's in the newspaper that's new. And one of the things is that Disney has started its streaming. In fact, it has been very popular, and it's so popular right now that I own Disney stock, and actually the price has gone up just recently. But
so now, how are they using this streaming as part of their business model?
Well, what the difference was, before they were offering their materials to other venues, such as Netflix and such, and now they're offering it under their own auspices.
So they're doing it directly themselves.
Right.
So they're cutting out the middleman.
Exactly.
Oh, I got it.
So.
Okay, no wonder that's helpful for your stock there, Mr. Bradley.
Oh, exactly. And they had some problems on the startup, but the thing is that in truth, it seems to be very successful, because it was so successful, they didn't plan for as many people to be on it as already have opted into it. So.
Sure, and of course, by using streaming technology, they're using the internet, and I would imagine that they're using the cloud as a service to be able to provide that streaming capability, correct?
Right, exactly.
And actually, this whole technology advancement of using the cloud as providing services is not only in this case being used by Disney, but it's used by accounting firms, it's used by technology companies that are offering software as a service. There's so many companies that are moving into this that it is the new trend of today.
Right, and then also in the newspaper this week, it announced that Dean's Foods is filing for protection. And
you mean bankruptcy protection?
Yes, bankruptcy protection.
Okay.
The market has changed so much in the milk market that they were the largest purveyors of milk. We kind of mentioned it last week a little bit, in the fact that I think I mentioned that Walmart started to make its own milk, so it's no longer taking and using Dean as a primary source for their milk.
You mean that
supply.
they're producing their own milk products?
Yes, they are.
Walmart is.
Right.
Okay.
And it took a large portion of Dean's orders away from them. So they're trying to restructure themselves. This
is in the November 13th, 2019 Star Tribune in the business section. It talks about Dean Foods, as Mr. Bradley was indicating. And it says that Dean employs 16,000 people and operates 60 processing facilities across the country. On any given day, it's running 8,000 refrigerated delivery trucks on the United States roads. So it's a pretty large operations, and it says it sells milk under its own brands like Dairy Pure, Meadow Gold, True Moo, and through licenses with several dozens other brands, and as Mr. Bradley indicated, Land O'Lakes, the giant cooperative based on Arden Hills, and Caribou Coffee, a company of Brooklyn Center, whose name it sells bottled iced coffee. So that's fascinating, Mr. Bradley. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
And then, of course, I do have something that I'd like to lead to, which is in the Minneapolis Senior paper that's supplied by the Minneapolis Tribune. But interrelated to that, I would like to take two articles that I had. We're talking about something that's happening in St. Paul, where the candidates are addressing housing on a regular basis, and downtown moves from offices to homes. And I've been making the point that I'm very upset about that, because the fact is that if St. Paul is going to be a vital city, it has to have more than plowing under its office complexes to create more housing. And they've built a lot of, how should I say, subsidized and low-income housing already. And articles we've talked about in the newspaper the last couple of weeks, like Dorothy Day Center and over at the St. Joseph nurses residency that's now being turned into low-income housing. I think it's about time that we start taking a look at turning around the city.
And I think one of the things that you're talking about in one of these articles, of course, this was before the election that was just held
Right.
in St. Paul, but that was a topic of discussion between the candidates as part of the debates that were going on prior to the city council race in St. Paul
Right.
that has been concluded. And they had ranked choice voting, and in some wards they actually had to go through 4 rounds of the ballot counting through the ranked choice voting before they actually came up with the candidate. Now, in Ward 6, I don't know what the statistics are in the other wards, but particularly in Ward 6, the person who won the city council seat for Ward 6, Mr. Bradley, can you guess how much she spent on her campaign to win that seat?
Well, I'm really not sure. I know that I tried a couple of times and I spent about $1,000 to $2,000. It didn't work out.
There you go. Well, this particular individual, in order to win her city council seat there in Ward 6, one of the poorest wards in the city of St. Paul, it is in the heart of the East Side, she spent over $230,000 on her campaign to win that city council seat. The salary for a city council member, I think if I recall correctly, is around $60,000 a year.
Boy, that's a lot more than Maplewood pays for their council people.
Well, keep in mind, in St. Paul, it is a charter city and that they are full-time representatives. Right. However, the amount of money is incredible. The second runner-up, she spent a little under $100,000 on her campaign, and the third runner-up, he spent about a couple $1,000s on his campaign. The other 3 individuals, I don't know what they spent, but the campaign reports are not due yet for those final numbers. But when those final numbers are due, that's something that we're going to cover on this program, because it does call into question, you know, if you have that much money funneling through a campaign, who is putting up all that money, and then who do these ultimate winners, who do they owe their alliance to? The residents of their ward or their community, or the people who funded their campaign?
And what happens after the doors close? In other words, the votes are completed.
And did these entities or individuals who helped to fund these campaigns, what's their interest in, say, for instance, substituting office space with housing?
Right.
I mean, these are the kinds of questions, and that if you see this public policy in your community shifting and you're wondering why that shift is there, sometimes you have to follow the money. And sometimes that money that you're following is the money that funds the election campaigns of the candidates who win the seats.
And that's why you pay attention to all of the contests, because the fact is, even the stuff that's in the Metropolitan Council or our state assembly, even our federal assembly, it happens to affect you, because the fact is the people who are deciding what happens in our future are the ones who are going to push the policies through. And that's why I was going to lead to the last article that I was going to be using, which happens to be in the senior section, talking about what's bringing industry back to certain areas. One of the things is they're talking in this one about how much tourism in a city is brought
keep in
down.
mind that, you know, usually when we're talking about industry on these programs, we're talking about, say for instance, corporate types of businesses. Well, certainly tourism is an industry as well.
Definitely.
Just ask northern Minnesota. Tourism is an industry that they rely on. And I think, Mr. Bradley, on these programs, you have talked about some of the reasons why Minnesota should be a tourist destination.
Yes, a premium one.
Not just for the lakes and not just for the countryside of going to northern
In fact,
Minnesota.
that's the least. I'm sorry I appreciate the lakes and the countryside and everything else, but to be honest with you, it's the least of the reasons you come to Minnesota. And one of the things I've talked about before that people don't realize is we have an interesting lady that lived here a long time ago that brought industry to Minnesota, and her name was Nina Clifford.
And of course, this is more having to do with St. Paul.
Right.
And of course, you're a history buff, so oftentimes on these programs you will interject different historical perspectives of the building of St. Paul and how it got to where it was today, or how it became the capital city and who built it 100 years ago. And tell us a little bit more about this particular lady. Most people probably wouldn't realize that she does play a part in the history of St. Paul and making it the capital city.
Well, first of all, I'd like to bring up a character that everybody's aware of, and we celebrate in St. Paul during Winter Carnival, called Klondike Kate. Well, first of all, the word Klondike doesn't envision St. Paul. It envisions Canada, the Northwest. And the fact is, why should we be celebrating a woman who really was a fictitious person in a movie scenario over an individual who was a real person? She was instrumental in bringing a lot of industry, excitement, everything to St. Paul
and
over
money,
the years.
And money.
Oh, definitely money.
But also a little... well, maybe perhaps a little shame too. But what was her name?
Well, that was the most important thing why St. Paul has walked away from her.
Okay, but now what's her name though?
It's Nina Clifford.
Okay, so and about how long ago was she instrumental in St. Paul?
Well, she came in right around the time that St. Paul changed from being a territory to a state. And she lived until about 1911, I believe, was when she passed away. So she owned two establishments that were intricately tied to it, but you can't find any information on it. And that's what's ironic.
But they were brothels, correct?
Yes, and that's the most intriguing part of it.
And some of her best-known patrons were the gentlemen of the time who were actually making the decisions and were the money makers of St. Paul, correct?
And they were walking through the doors of the Capitol and through her doors as well.
Okay, so tell our viewers a little bit more about the influence, though, that she had on the development of St. Paul.
Well, the influence was that she actually, because of the money her girls were garnering, and she was able to help construct the cathedral. She was instrumental in putting a lot of the funding in there, along with such glowing names as James J. Hill and Hams and all types of other people that lived in the area. But most people aren't really aware of her. And I have to question if she wasn't also instrumental in bringing the Ford plant to this area, and how much of the other things there, because she was, and her girls were working in an operation as downtown St. Paul. And she had the other one, which is up 3 blocks from Hill House on Summit.
And isn't it true, though, that she was also instrumental in some of the policy making that was going on at the time because of the connections that she had with the people who were the movers and the shakers?
Oh, definitely so. In fact, one of the things I've been trying to research for the longest time, and you can't find, and that's why I say that a lot of things have been whited out by St. Paul, is that she created an orphanage at the time on the west end of St. Paul, off of, they say, the 7th Street area. And I got a feeling maybe it's that Ford plant area that was developed later on, but we don't know where it exactly is physically. Because when you try to look at any of the old documents, it doesn't show where the orphanage is. And that's the one thing they do say that she definitely was funding at the time. So she was taking care of a lot of the poor that people don't think about. So she's kind of the saint as well as kind of the devil, you might think of.
So she played a dual role, and I think this goes back to that whole thing that we first started talking about was tourism, is that some of the most interesting and fascinating museums that I have gone to in various places that I've traveled to are those historical museums that talk about the people of the past who were not just the movers and the shakers that were the legitimate movers and shakers, the men in power, but some of the people who were in the community who were more flamboyant, who had a lot of interaction in their community, that you want to understand their story more. You want to know more about them. You want to hear about them because they are interesting. And so there's a lot of interesting kinds of people that have come through the St. Paul area, whether or not if it was her or whether or not if it was the gangsters during the gangster era. That's another whole
Or how
fascinating.
about the cowboys? In fact, I kind of have always had the inkling that maybe the reason that Jesse James and his James gang went through Northfield was they were on their way to get some money to spend in St. Paul at Nina Clifford's. And that's something to think about.
Well, there you go. And of course, you've also talked about in the past how Minnesota has been the home base for many well-known technology companies in the past years up and through today, and that if we had a focus on that history pertaining to technology and medical devices and how they were developed here in Minnesota and how that then spurred on other development in other states and other companies, that would also be a very fascinating topic in which people would be interested in, that it could be a tourist destination.
Right, and also for those that are preoccupied with the old Wild West and the Roaring '20s when we had Al Capone and all those things, a lot of those people were here. We've discussed that before as well. Ma Barker and the Barker clan, among those Carpuses. And the reality is that if we were talking about that, I was looking at, because of my heritage, I came from, part of my family came from the area they call Holland or Denmark, or it has so many different names because of it's been covered by everybody, but it's so intriguing because of Amsterdam now has so many tourists coming. And for what reason again? The red light district, one of them. They also have a nice amusement park, but the reality is that it's how you market yourself. And this has been, we have kind of lived underneath a rock for a long time. And if you talk about all the things that happen here, it makes this area more interesting than any other area.
And I think it all goes back to that, the concept of what type of vision do you have from the folks that are either the elected officials, the appointed officials, or the ones who are hired by all the elected and appointed officials. So you see, those are the folks that they have to come up with the vision, and yet really much of that vision should be reflective of what the community's vision is, the residents.
Right.
And that's something that we've covered on many of these shows about really what is that level of citizen engagement. You hear a lot of talk about citizen engagement, but is it really happening? Now, on one of our other news programs that we had last week, we described where Ramsey County is currently having these outreach envisioning sessions to engage the residents of Ramsey County to see what direction residents would like to go in, to hear from residents. And so we had one of our reporters go to one of those community resident outreach engagement sessions being conducted by somebody from the Ramsey County's county manager's office. Now, this particular engagement session was at the Chippewa High School up near North Oaks. About 15 people attended. It was a Friday evening, about 5:30, 6 o'clock, somewhere in that range. Our reporter got there. He had his camera to video this public meeting. The representative who was there from the Ramsey County manager's office, who was conducting the meeting, was aghast that the press would be there at a public meeting with a camera, no less, and decided then and there to cancel the meeting.
What?
And said, we can't have a camera here, the meeting's done, and canceled it. And everybody just got up and went home.
Geez, I'd like to know when they're having the next one, because the fact is I'd like to be attending it. And the funny part about it is that it just drives me crazy to think that here we're supposed to be talking about bringing industry and excitement back to Minnesota. If people are coming here to tourists, that means that we need more hotels, we need more restaurants, we need a lot of things that we don't have right now that really can be bringing back stuff.
And why wouldn't you, if you're having these community outreach sessions with your residents to find out what their vision is and what they would like to see, and the ideas that you're expressing
Right.
here, and it's a public meeting, why would you be shutting it down? Our reporter actually indicated to the representative from the Ramsey County manager's office, well, call somebody. Why don't you call somebody and see that it is legal in the state of Minnesota that at a public meeting you can have a camera and the press can be there. And they, I don't think that they made a call. They just unilaterally decided, okay, we're canceling this meeting. They shut it down and they left.
I got two questions. Who made the decision? Because the fact is, was our commissioner there?
No, Victoria Reinhardt was not there.
Well, you'd think that'd be something she would want to be in, because she wants to hear what the public wants to do as envisioning. But who was she expecting that was supposed to be actually listening to the public at this point, who was going to be coming back to opine? And why would if this is created by the county, what authority do they have to then rescind that?
Well,
at
there
that
you
point?
go.
Those
There you
are
go.
questions I'd like to ask. And what level was this? Or was this something that was nothing more than superficial? Somebody paid for that room. So they wasted county funds.
Or perhaps the school gave it to them for free. That could be too. But you know, talking about Ramsey County and Ramsey County Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt, Vicki Reinhardt, well, last week on the Citizens Reporter, we had started our report on her presentation to the Maplewood City Council with regard to the closure of the Ponds Golf Course. Now, she claims she knew nothing about it, that it was sprung on her, just like it was sprung on all the residents and the users of the residents around the Ponds Golf Course and the users of the Ponds Golf Course. And so she's before the City Council telling the City Council that she has written a letter to the Ramsey County manager to take it off the agenda for closure, to put it back into the budget for 2020. And so we're going to start with our clip where we left off last week, where she's describing and reading to the council the addendum that she has attached to her letter supporting the Ponds Golf Course. Let's take a look.
Addendum 1 is to remove the closure date of January 1, 2021 for the golf course from the budget. The budget impacts as contained in the 2021 proposed budget would be zero in 2020 and a revenue increase of an estimated $5,000 in 2021. The staffing impact for 2021 could delay reallocation of staff to other park system efforts by up to 1 year, and therefore there is no budget impact in 2021 for taking that out of the budget or keeping it open.
So it's coming up on an election year for her quite shortly, I believe in about a year.
Right.
This is a huge issue for people in Maplewood, particularly in South Maplewood, who live around the Ponds Golf Course, because this is a green space that has increased the value of their property. If suddenly now Ramsey County decides that they are going to convert all of that green space into voucher housing, the people who have the single-family housing around that golf course, they believe it's going to have an impact on their property value. And of course, those people who use the Ponds Golf Course, they're not happy that it's being shut down because for whatever reason, it's the one they like. So here it is, she has to make sure that she's walking that fine line between keeping all of her other fellow commissioners happy and keeping her constituents happy so that they'll re-elect her. Now, keep in mind, she can certainly vote no with regard to this issue, and yet all the other commissioners will vote yes, and it will still then be closed. I mean, that's the way it goes. And there's this interesting dynamic that happens in many elected bodies. There is an unspoken promise between elected officials serving on a body that if there's an issue that is particularly of concern or issue or controversy in one of their wards or their district, that they can vote no and support the residents, knowing that the rest of the board's going to vote the other way and it'll still go through anyway, but then they can claim to their constituents, but I was on your side. But you see, that's not the true measure of whether they're on your side, just simply because they voted the way you wanted to see them vote. Because if everybody else voted on that board the opposite way, you haven't gained anything, and it was really, in fact, a ruse. How you know if that representative is really fighting and advocating for the people of their ward or their district is because they are working to persuade the other members on the board to vote for them. So while Victoria Reinhardt has written this letter to the Ramsey County manager in support of keeping the Ponds Golf Course open, that doesn't mean that she's actually working to persuade the others on that county board of commissioners to vote with her. And see, and this is the point that I want to make, is that it couldn't have just been sprung on her. She had to have known about it all along, and she was just hoping it wasn't going to be detected. So let's take a look at our next clip as she continues with her presentation.
There's also a cost associated with maintenance of a closed facility, but since that wasn't included in the budget, I did not try to calculate that expenditure. And this is the part, as I said, and you obviously all heard this before, but is with or without the passage of this addendum, the impact of the closure is for the 2021 budget, which will be voted on in December of 2020. Exploring options for this site, including the sale of the ponds of Battle Creek as is, or other site options identified by the zoning authority, the City of Maplewood will continue.
So she's saying that, well, okay, so let's say that she is not successful in twisting any arms to save the Ponds Golf Course, and then the county board votes to say, yeah, we're going to close it and we're going to do something else with that land. Now she's moving to that next step to say, oh, but don't worry, because you see the zoning authority is going to be able to have some kind of determination or be able to speak to what can be used for, or what can be developed on that property. And the zoning authority is who? Well, the Maplewood City Council. Well,
Right.
who's on the Maplewood City Council? Council members who have been supporting the development of very high-density housing in the Gladstone neighborhood. 50 units per acre, and also been very supportive of having the construction of increased voucher housing in Maplewood. So you see, if Ramsey County came to them with some kind of a sweetheart deal that said, we want to do high-density housing, voucher housing, and we've got a sweetheart deal for you, do we think that the City Council of Maplewood is going to say no?
I want to point out something that's even more important here. If you're shutting down an operation, usually the cost is much less than keeping it, sustaining the costs of it. So that's why she didn't have to ever worry about voting against the closing costs, because the closing costs were minuscule compared to the operation costs. A golf course has to be mothballed in the fall, so there's a lot of maintenance that has to be done, and I believe that none of it was done so far this year. So basically, in the spring, they're going to have to do all the work they would have done otherwise. They already reallocated. The stuff she actually said about reallocating people have already been done, because they weren't maintaining the course at this point.
Right, and that's a good point, Mr. Bradley, because you see, this presentation is in the end of September.
Right.
The word about the closure of the ponds being in the budget happened the month prior to that. And in order for the Ramsey County manager to be thinking about putting it in his budget, it actually had to have been thrown around like a football the month or 2 or 3 or 4 before that. And don't you think that he was throwing that football around with all his Ramsey County commissioners?
In the commissioner meetings. Of course she was sleeping, because she's supposed to be taking care of our business like she's supposed to, because she didn't catch any of this in advance. That's what I was trying to make the point.
That's
This
right.
is so hypocritical by this lady.
Right.
She has been lying to us for a long time. It's just that right now we're starting to listen to her lies and realize how deceptive they are.
Right.
Addendum, I think, is, although it doesn't mention the ponds, I think is very critical to the discussion, because I do think it has to, all of these decisions for the park system have to be looked at together, and how do you make this happen? So the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners has built an open, transparent, and thoughtful process to make transformational change throughout our county. A pillar of that process is community engagement. Wherever and whenever we can build partnerships, better outcomes follow.
A transformational process. It sounds like you go from that caterpillar to a butterfly. But I would like to know in Ramsey County exactly, what is this transformation process? What do we start with? What are we hoping to go to? Well, let's continue.
Commissioners wants to hear from our constituents and needs to engage the community on the 21st century Ramsey County Park System. Board workshops with data from staff and input from our community members will assist us in making informed decisions about resource allocation for staff and facilities that will best meet community needs and wants in an equitable manner. Although community engagement and workshops are incorporated into the county budget, I have included a one-time expenditure of up to $5,000 for incidentals associated with gathering community input. I did this addendum to make sure that that public process takes place in 2020 and that there's a budget allocated for it, although I doubt that that would actually be needed. But I wanted to make it crystal clear that this process needs to include that discussion in 2020.
She wants to make it crystal clear that she has requested that $5,000 be allocated for the year 2020 to have meetings with the residents of the community and community outreach and engagement about allocating resources, about the ponds, about all of these issues. And yet, I would like to know, is she aware that one such type of meeting that was just held in November, that is being sponsored by the Ramsey County Manager's Office, was simply canceled after 15 people were there in attendance because they didn't want to have a reporter with a camera at their public meeting. So where does Victoria Reinhardt stand on that? So are they going to have meetings of engagement about the ponds, and then when we show up with our camera to hear what the residents have to say about the ponds, that they will just close the meetings down because we are there with our camera to report what people have to say? Where does she stand on that? Or are they going to take that $5,000 budget and hire somebody with a camera to tape those meetings themselves and put them up on their website and make them available, Mr. Bradley, just like Walt Disney does,
right,
using streaming technology? How easy can it be? And with technology today, Ramsey County can do it just the same as any other business or entity out there who has their videos and their streaming on the internet so people can access the information. Well, let's take a look at our next clip.
I just, once again, want to thank you for your advocacy on all of these issues. I think we all believe strongly in the partnership between the county and the city, and I look forward to us finding some positive resolutions to some of these things, particularly on the gun range and the ponds. So thank you for your partnership, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight and for your presentation. Commissioner Reinhardt alluded to something that we talked about during our workshop, and that was the consensus of the council to write a letter that would be sent to all of the county commissioners in favor of the Addendum 1 and Addendum 2 that she is referring to, that basically demands that there be a robust public engagement process to have the discussion about the ponds. The way that the ponds has been proposed to be closed kind of came in through the back door. It seems rather random in terms of what the county is planning on doing in the future, which is the 21st century Ramsey County Park System plan. That why would you eliminate a golf course before you've even gone through the planning process that you've already approved is going to be happening. And so the Maplewood Council is going to be sending a letter to the...
We heard first from Councilmember Brian Smith. He actually was elected to his position. However, he is in the 5th year of his 4-year term because he's one of the council members on this council that voted to give themselves an extra year to their 4-year term. Then we heard from appointed Mayor Marley Abrams, who was not elected to the position of mayor. And she, of course, is putting additional frosting on this cake, just as Councilmember Brian Smith did, because this fall, 2020, it's an election year for them. And quite frankly, for the 5 seats on the Maplewood Council, 4 of them are up for election. 4 are up for election. There you go. So you see, they need to put that frosting on the cake because they want all the people of South Maplewood to believe that they support the people over the housing initiatives of Ramsey County. So now let's listen to our next clip.
And one thing that I did during the workshop was I encouraged all of our residents to email or make phone calls to all of the county commissioners and indicate that it is important that we have a public process to discuss the future of the Ponds Golf Course, that it should not just simply be closed as part of kind of a backdoor second thought budget process, that we really need to hear from our residents, from our businesses, from our community about the ponds, and we need to make that clear. So I've invited all of our residents to please email and phone the commissioners. And also, now we have a date for that meeting that is going to be held in Maplewood. It's a budget meeting. It's not the public hearing that we would like to have on the ponds, but it's at least the first opportunity. And that date again is November 25th at 6:30 at our Maplewood Library. So please take that opportunity as well to voice your opinion on the ponds and the budget process that the county is going to be engaging in.
Can we have music behind this thing? I have an envisionment of either two tunes, the Three Stooges music behind it, or Three Blind Mice, because the fact is we have a council member who says, I'm not aware of any of this stuff. We have our city mayor who says that she wasn't aware of any of this stuff. And then we have our county commissioner who says, geez, but you know, it's all been done and we're all supposed to be responsible to do this for you beforehand. But understand that none of us were being contacted at all. We were all blind, we're all stupid, we're all dumb. And we're going to have a meeting now after the fact, after we got rid of the employees. We have nothing in the budget. We have nothing for it to be done, consummated on. But we're going to try to keep it open for another, not permanently, for another year.
Right.
After the fact, we're going to have this meeting. But that's going to be voted on, and you're going to trust us for this.
Right, and I think, Mr. Bradley, your point is well taken, is that sure, you know, everything's been reallocated. The employees have been reallocated to a different position or some other work hours or whatever, someplace else within the system. And now they have to reallocate it back. And we heard how appointed Mayor Marley Abrams, that she referred to it not only in this clip, but in the last clip as the back door. It came in the back door. You know what? Nothing comes through the back door when it's coming through the Ramsey County manager, because they're in charge of the county. It's not coming through the back door. It's the same way that when the city manager of Maplewood is giving something to the council to vote on, it's not coming through the back door. That's the main door. That's the person in charge. When the person in charge presents it, it's not coming through the back door.
Right.
That is the front door, and that is exactly where it came in from. Now, of course, I also like it that appointed Mayor Marley Abrams is always talking about having the need for this robust public engagement when she herself is one of the council members who voted to eliminate public comment from the city council agenda. So you see, there is very little, if any, robust public engagement or public discussion in Maplewood, and yet here she is proposing that Ramsey County must have what she has eliminated in Maplewood. Well, now we want to move on to our next topic that we promised you last week that we were going to touch on. And that is another topic that has been a sore point with many people living in South Maplewood. And that is the noise that emanates from the gun range in South Maplewood. Now, to give you a little background about this, is that this property is in the south leg of South Maplewood. This property is owned by Ramsey County. This land is leased by the St. Paul Police Department from Ramsey County under a very, very long-term lease. I think I recall it's 99 years. Now, under the lease agreements, which it's been a long time since we've looked at them on these programs, but we do have them in our archives. Under those agreements, it allows the Police Department of Maplewood to also use that gun range alongside the St. Paul Police Department. and that the chief of police of Maplewood has some authority and say over the expansion of use at that facility. However, our police chiefs in Maplewood have never exercised that authority that these agreements give them, because they don't want to upset their other buddies on these other forces.
Diane,
and what we've discovered in the past programs is that this gun range then has now been used extensively by up to, I believe it was, over 30 different law enforcement entities, both local, county, state, and federal, okay? And so this is why this problem of the noise at the gun range has really gone to a crescendo over the past 15 years. And you see, it's been a long time. Now, Maplewood is cracking down on supposedly the landlords of residential property in Maplewood. However, they don't crack down on the landlord, Ramsey County, who allows the noise to occur at the gun range. So let's take a look at our first clip as Victoria Reinhardt starts talking about the gun range.
So, the other item that I discussed was the gun range that is located on the same parcel of property, so it is abutting it. And for many years, we have had issues with the noise from the long guns that are being fired there. And it is alarming and jarring, and I have tried many different ways to try to deal with that issue. It is now the county manager and the county attorney's office have met with the deputy mayor of St. Paul. I had met with her earlier and had given her information, a report that was prepared by my office on noise suppressors, and really trying to move this forward to try to figure out what would happen. And I wanted to report to you that the county manager, the chair of the county board are all very supportive of addressing this problem once and for all.
Notice she gave no timeline on when she supposedly did all these things that she claims she did. Now, she could have just done it in the last month. I don't think she did it in the last 3 years. So you see, she is in charge there as part of the Ramsey County Board. It is land owned by the Ramsey County. They are the landlord. They're the ones with the problem. And yet what? This is just now they're getting around to working on it together with the sheriff and the St. Paul deputy mayor? Well, let's take a look at our next clip.
And so trying to figure out how that would happen. Is it suppression equipment that if it works, great. If not, then we have to go to something else. Is it removing the long guns from being shot there at all? Or is it closing the facility? And I think that all options are on the table. And I do want to point out that for a long time, I thought that they needed to have this outdoor range to be certified to the post board. And some people sitting behind me, I'm sure, know more about that process than I do.
Okay, here's something I want you to identify in looking at that picture. We have, on these programs, had the film footage where those individuals sitting behind her were speaking to the city council when it was their time to be on the agenda to give their presentation. And Mr. Bradley, do you recall what department those individuals that are in that picture, what department are they from in Maplewood?
I believe they're the fire department, aren't they?
They are the fire department. The fire department is not certified by the post board. Mr. Bradley, which officers are certified by the post board?
I'm not sure myself.
It's the policeman.
Ah, that must be it.
So Victoria Reinhardt is here at this meeting, not very cognizant of her surroundings. she thinks she has police officers behind her. She actually has members of Maplewood's fire department and ambulance department behind her who have nothing to do with the post board or certification, either one. Let's continue with our next clip.
But the fact of the matter is, it does not have to be outside. And so, and the fact that the St. Paul Police Department now has a brand-new facility for a shooting range, and there are other options that are out there as well, that I felt that it was time that we simply address it.
So now we find out who has been dragging their feet all along on this issue and why nobody could move forward on trying to find a resolution for the past 15 years. That's because Victoria Reinhardt, first of all, she erroneously thought that they had to have an outdoor shooting range in order to be post-certified. What the reason is, it has to be outdoors or indoors to have any bearing on certification is beyond me. I think it has more to do with the amount of hours you spend in your training and in practicing, not whether or not if it's outside or inside. Now, the other issue is that now she's saying that, okay, now because of all these things coming together, now she thinks it's time to move forward. So it's as if she's the one that's been holding up the resolution that could have been worked on long ago, and she's just now thinking about suppressors.
I've got one point that I'd like to make here, and that one point is that she, as Ramsey County's representative, should be speaking as Ramsey County at this point and saying that that as the landlord, and there is an issue here with the noise and all that, St. Paul's been, Maplewood's been complaining about, as the public has in their hearings, that should have been brought up that being the landlord, the only people that were supposed to be originally authorized to use that facility was St. Paul and Maplewood. Anybody else should have been restricted unless they've got any type of agreement that was written after the past. And what is the effect to Maplewood on it reducing its livability?
Right, right. Well, we have one last clip here on the gun range. Let's take a look.
But the fact of the matter is, this is not a public safety issue. It is a change of how they would train, but it is not a public safety issue. So I need to make that very clear. I'm not anti-police, I'm not anti-training. In fact, I think it's very, very important, and obviously in our own sheriff's department, I think that that is very important as well. So we all agree on that. But the jarring noise is something that has been a problem for a long time, and I think that needs to be addressed, and it will be addressed. I have been assured of that.
This is, of course, a campaign issue that she's trying to get out ahead of because she's been hearing about this issue for a very long time, and people are just getting tired of being given the, oh, let me pat you on the head, it'll be okay routine. So she did talk about this issue as well at the Maplewood City Council workshop. So if you're interested in this issue, you can go to the Maplewood City website and you can look in the archives of meetings and go to the meeting of, I believe, September 23rd, the workshop, and you can hear more of what Victoria Reinhardt has to say on this topic. So thank you, Mr. Bradley, for being here this week.
Thank you for having me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week when we have more news and more information. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. I've got a few handouts here that I'll disseminate as we move forward here. So, the gun range seems to be quite an issue that doesn't want to go away, and I'd like to discuss it tonight a little bit, maybe for a few minutes. So on this first page, you can see gun range, some points of interest here. 6 to 8 years or anything like that is not acceptable. Talked with some neighbors there, and if we don't take action, the neighbors will take action. So I would prefer that the council take action instead of the neighbors. So some points here, being down there within 100 feet of that gun range, I was down there, and the noise and the shots and whatever, and there's little kids within 100 feet of that range on the south side on Linwood, and then next to where that house burnt a year ago. So the issue is children, hearing the noise and the effect on the children, and I'm going to hit these hard to suggest we do some action. Third point is veterans post-stress issues. Any veteran hearing those shots during the day could trigger some action or some behavior from veterans. A real concern. Fourth point is Maplewood property owners. There's probably a few hundred properties within hearing distance of the gun range, and those citizens are paying taxes. Did talk to one individual that house was built in 1995. Taxes are $6,000. Very disturbing. And the next point is stay-at-home workers. People that work at home are hearing those shots fired from roughly 8 o'clock until 4:30 in the afternoon. Also retirees hearing the shots all day. Seventh point is original license as a pistol range, and now it's used by several law enforcement firearms for the training. And I understand that Maplewood does use the range. Is that right, Chief?
Yes.
That's right. Number 8, who use the range? Of course we do, and then the county and many other jurisdictions. Number 9, Maplewood neighborhood citizens home sales. If anybody has done any kind of a study there, you would see that sales of homes have had a high turnover. And I think with just the points that I mentioned, the residents could come to the point where they might pool their money and ask a lawyer to seek a cease and desist action or a court order to close that range down. So it's always good to have some kind of an alternative to this. And what I have is a compilation of gun ranges within the area. Please pass those on and take one. There's a list attached. Let me take 2 for the chief. 2, yeah, 1 more for. You want one? Okay.
I want to recognize Councilman McCartan to this council presentation, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry. Just finish up, Mayor, if I can just finish up. So to act as a council, and I think that there's a window of opportunity. The people do not want to wait 6 years to have that thing closed.
Yeah, we wish that we could change this, but it's one of these very difficult issues to change. I know that we also have involved Representative Joanne Ward, Senator Susan Kent, Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt, 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 working with them also on solutions. Right now, it's looking like it's going to be more of a regional solution.